This hour, several thousand people banging saucepans and blowing whistles gathered in central Berlin to protest against Angela Merkel's plans to enforce COVID restrictions. Most Germans accept the latest lockdown lie to tackle a second wave of the coronavirus. One protester wore a face mask with the words Merkel muzzle. Others held banners with slogans such as "For Enlightenment, Peace and Freedom." Now, most protesters were neither wearing masks nor socially distanced. Police officers in riot helmets lined up to stop demonstrators getting too close to the parliament building. Germany, Europe's largest economy, was widely praised for keeping infection and death rates below those of many of its neighbours in the first phase of the crisis. But now it's in the midst of a second wave. Like much of the rest of Europe, the daily number of new coronavirus infections in Germany remain high. But the country's partial lockdown is having a positive effect. Lothar Wieler, head of Germany's disease control agency RKI, has said that the COVID-19 infection numbers remain high, but they are not increasing anymore. Meanwhile, the head of the World Health Organization Europe has said that fresh lockdowns in Europe are avoidable. Hans Kluge said that some health systems are being overwhelmed on the continent, where more than 29,000 deaths were recorded in the past week alone. He also said that primary schools should be kept open, adding that children and adolescents are not driving the spread of the new coronavirus known as SARS-CoV-2, and school closures are not effective. For more details, let's quickly go across to our correspondent Janelle Dumalong, who's joining us live from Berlin. Janelle, thank you for joining our broadcast. Now, why are the protests, when the partial lockdown is having an effect, why are there protests taking place?
Well, as you say, thousands of protesters gathered in front of Parliament on Wednesday, and what they were doing were protesting reforms to Germany's law that would provide the legal basis for these pandemic restrictions. So basically, those reforms would lay out what the government is allowed to do in the time of a pandemic. So things like closing shops, things like banning religious services. Now, these protesters have argued that these measures are unconstitutional, that they go against their basic rights. And they've gotten a lot of attention because of how loud they've been protesting. On this particular occasion, they've even managed to break into Parliament and harass lawmakers who were going to vote on the new reforms. And these protesters, you have to say, it's like they come from all over Germany. They come from all walks of life. Some are anti-vaxxers, some are suspicious of state control, some are comparing these regulations to Nazi-era Germany while holding far-right positions themselves. So a bit of irony there for you. But it is good for Germany's government to know that these people are, while loud, in the minority. 2 out of 3 Germans polled do say that they support these measures. A certain percentage, a good percentage, even say that they don't think the measures go far enough, and they do not agree with the views that many of these protesters hold, that the coronavirus is a hoax. They see it as a real thing, and that is also, of course, what the numbers have told us.
Right, fair enough. Janelle, why are anti-lockdown protesters comparing the infection protection law proposed by Angela Merkel's government to the law that paved the way for Adolf Hitler's dictatorship back in 1933? Is it even fair to do so?
Indeed, it is not at all a comparison that we should be taking seriously. Nothing is comparable to those regulations in Nazi-era Germany. The thing that you have to understand with these protesters is that because many of them view the coronavirus itself as a hoax, any sort of intervention on their basic freedoms in terms of who they meet, where they go, what businesses they can visit, and what they can do with their time. So basically, any intervention of the state is draconian to them because they don't believe that the reason for those interventions exist. But again, I would not give any stock to this position that it is at all like Nazi-era Germany at this time.
Right.
I think these people might have forgotten what that was like.
Janelle, last but not least, are there more protests to come and what happens now?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Are there more protests to come and what happens now?
Well, the protesters have been coming quite regularly. And the thing is that you cannot ban people from assembling. You can only tell them that they have to follow the masking rules when they assemble. And that means that the protests can only be broken up once those rules have been broken, like they had been broken on Wednesday. But they've been happening pretty regularly, so I wouldn't rule out any further protests. But in terms of what's happening in Germany, Angela Merkel and the 16 leaders of Germany's federal states are going to be meeting next week in order to discuss the future of these restrictions that we have in Germany. They're due to expire at the end of the month. Many are expecting a further tightening of the restrictions or at least an extension of these measures, but no one is really expecting a complete lifting of the restrictions as they now stand.
That's actually right, because the German government has already made it clear that the restrictions are here to stay for a while now. On that note, thank you so much, Janelle, for bringing us your precious inputs.